Hello and welcome to the first quarter webinar from the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund in conjunction with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. My name is Nick Brule. I'm the Senior Program Manager here at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. And today is going to be pretty simple. We're going to cover the first quarter data, and I'll take us up to year-to-date data for our fatal law enforcement crashes, and maybe take a quick look at some of the injury cases that I've been looking at as well, so we get an idea as to what's happening out there. I'm also going to talk about a couple of conferences, one that I went to and then one that's coming up, so you can all be prepared to attend that virtually if you like, or if you want to travel to Maryland in person. I'll give you all the details on that important traffic safety conference that's coming up next month. And of course, we're going to go over the numbers and just do some comparative analysis between 2022 and 2023. So before I get into all that, I'd like to introduce Rio Nelson. He's a highway safety specialist with the Enforcement and Justice Services Division of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, who's going to share some details about what's going on at NHTSA right now with us. So welcome, Rio.
Thank you, Nick, for the introduction. I appreciate it. And NHTSA appreciates the partnership with the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund and its efforts you take to keep the names of law enforcement officers off the wall. According to the latest preliminary data, 31,785 deaths occurred from traffic fatalities in the first 9 months of 2022. Which is a 0.2% decrease in the previous year's first 9 months. And also initial data from the federal highways also show that vehicle miles traveled for the first 9 months increased in 2022 by 39 billion miles, which is a 1.6% increase. These numbers highlight the continued importance of our efforts towards our zero death goal, guided by the Safe System approach, which is the foundation of the National Roadway Safety Strategy. One area of focus for NHTSA is enhancing the safety of our first responders. Cooperative efforts from the federal highways are underway to conduct research and countermeasures to roadside incidents involving first responders and others working at the roadside. The Enforcement Justice Services Division is leading congressional mandated efforts to reduce roadside struck-by incidents involving first responders. EJS is providing funding for NHTSA Special Crash Investigations Group to do deeper dives into struck-by incidents involving first responders where move-over law violations are involved. Agreements also have been issued to support data collection and examining efficacy move-over laws and the equipment loan program to evaluate roadside safety technologies. In addition to our efforts in enhancing the safety of first responders, NHTSA has launched targeted educational campaigns to raise awareness about the dangers of speeding and its impact on road safety. These campaigns include national and local initiatives and are aimed at educating drivers and the general public about the risks of speeding, highlighting the consequences, and promoting safety driving behaviors. Materials can be found on trafficsafetymarketing.gov. NHTSA remains steadfast in its commitment to saving lives, preventing injuries, and reducing traffic fatalities caused by speeding. We urge all drivers to recognize the risk of speeding and to drive responsibly, obey posted speed limits, and always prioritize safety on the road. And with that conclusion, I will hand things back over to Nick. Thank you for your time.
As always, thank you, Rio, and we always appreciate our partnership with NHTSA. And for everyone who's watching, if you have questions that I can try and answer, pop those into the chat, and Anna, who's here with me, will try and get those questions to me, and I'll try, or Rio and I will try and answer those questions. And before I get into the details for the first quarter and the things I mentioned, if you have, and your regular watchers or your LELs who are out there, or your regular participants for these quarterly webinars, and you have a topic, or you have someone you know would be a dynamic speaker, or someone you'd like to hear more from, or know that the group would benefit from, you know, we always sort of operate within the framework of law enforcement fatalities and injuries. And as Rio mentioned, we are working hard here at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund to keep names off the wall. And I've been here for a number of years, and we're adding more names than I ever thought we would be. And I'm sure a lot of people share that. And I'll talk a little bit about what the numbers are like for this upcoming police week. They've just finished adding the names for all of the 2022 line of duty deaths. Those names will be read here pretty soon at the candlelight vigil, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Rio did mention the focus on slow down and move over laws, as well as managing struck by incidents for first responders. That's the huge and large portion of what it is that this conference that's coming up in May that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. That's one of their primary focuses. And so it's something I really hope folks will pay attention to and participate in. As I mentioned, these are a couple of snapshots. You may have seen them before. The memorial is going to be hosting Police Week from May 9th through the 20th. The candlelight vigil is on the 13th, and this is a very somber experience, but it is one that if you have not experienced and you are in Washington, D.C., I would encourage you to come and participate in. It is where all the survivors and representatives of those individuals who died in the line of duty in the year 2022 and our historic cases come to hear the names read through a very moving ceremony, which, as you see in this picture, ends in a candle being lit from one main flame, and it spreads out throughout the audience. It's, as I said, it's quite moving. There are other events. You have the Police Unity Tour arrival on the 12th. Then there's the National FOP ceremony, which is on the west lawn of the Capitol. And then there are sporadic other events going on throughout the week, like the Standing Watch for the Fallen and some honor guard competitions and things like that. So if you're in DC, definitely plan on attending those and coming to the museum. Recently, we were at LIFESAVERS, and when I say we, you see Troy Anderson, who I work with here at the Memorial Fund. We were in, that's Blitz, that was at the conference, who's the Seattle Seahawks mascot. So he was there, and there's just a snapshot of our booth. LIFESAVERS was a really excellent conference. If you're not familiar with LIFESAVERS, it has a number of sessions that apply to law enforcement. Almost all of these sessions apply to law enforcement in some fashion. There are sessions on technology. NHTSA is a major sponsor and participates in this event. There's an award ceremony that's managed by NHTSA at this event. But you see, if you just take a quick look at the snapshot of one of the day's sessions, you see there's focus on distracted driving, child protection, automated vehicles, and there's a whole track for criminal justice and law enforcement. So I got an opportunity to present to a very large audience. It's one of the largest audience I've ever presented to. And I co-presented with a guy named Mike Munson. And Mike and I talked about what was happening in terms of law enforcement fatalities. We looked at the data and we discussed things such as struck by crashes, seatbelt usage, training, speeding, all of the things. If you've watched these webinars from me before, the things we all still continue to focus on. But I push that out because LIFESAVERS, you make a lot of great connections there. The next one is going to be in Denver. I find this to be a very useful conference, and you meet a great number of people who are doing the same thing you are doing, even if they're from the private sector or managing something from a different standpoint that's not, say, just law enforcement. You're all still speaking the same language. So it's definitely worth your time. So there is some good news as we look at the data, and I say good news knocking on wood. I don't want to be the rookie in the car who says, gee, it sure is quiet, when you know that's bad news. But I've got to report on the data. And for the first time in my 8 years here at the Memorial Fund, we had no traffic fatalities for law enforcement in the month of January. And the numbers have remained low. At one point, we were 85% lower than where we were in 2022. Now, that does not, 1 month and 1 quarter does not a trend make. However, I think we have to acknowledge when we do have this good news and we see these better trends going on, and can perhaps hope that some of the things that we have been striving to do over all these years and all this messaging and all of the attention that is now getting focused on struck bys and single vehicle crashes and speeding and training, is hopefully making a difference. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't have another spike and be right up where we were before, but as we're talking right now, our numbers are looking better than they have in quite a while. So that encourages me. And here's where they are right now. We experienced a lot of COVID deaths in 2020, 2021. I'll talk a little bit more about that. One thing I would mention is that we're putting 556 names on the wall this year. 224 were from the year 2022. So those were line of duty deaths that occurred in 2022, which accounts for traffic, accounts for COVID, accounts for firearms, and accounts for other. There were 332 prior year cases that got added in this group for 2022. And a predominant number of those cases were holdover COVID cases from 2020 and 2021 that had not been, were not able to be passed or accepted in that prior year. Firearms were down by 26%. Traffic related, this is good news. We're down 67% right now. And I think at this time last year, as you can see, we were much higher than we are now. And then as COVID cases go down, you see the other causes category also goes down. I would remind you that we are still receiving and analyzing and putting on the wall the names of individuals who have died as a result of cancer from their exposure at the World Trade Center sites, the Shanksville sites, and the Pentagon. Predominantly from the WTC sites, we are still seeing a number of people suffering from cancers due to their exposure to the toxins and things that were part of the collapses down at the World Trade Center. So I'm going to just talk about the 2022 first quarter data because for 2023, we have, as you saw there, we have 7 crashes. We have 7 cases, 5 of which are crashes. Of those 5, 1 is a single vehicle crash, 1 is a struck by, and 1 is a motorcycle crash. But in this first quarter of 2022, looking a year back, this is what things look like. We had 9 auto collisions, and you can see here what they were doing when they were involved in those crashes, and then what was happening in the single vehicle crashes. Understanding that the 2022 data is complete, and when I get 2023 information, I still have to wait for the actual cases and submissions to come in to begin to pull out those nuggets in those crashes with regard to seatbelts, with regard to distraction, whether or not the striking operator was impaired, to get all of the important details beyond what I can learn in the news media or through word of mouth or what other sources I might have. It takes me time to get the 2023 data. So when I'm talking about impaired drivers or seatbelt usage and things this earlier in the year, I really don't have a whole lot of data. But this is great comparative data to just show how things have improved a little bit comparing these first quarters. So of the struck by crashes, there were 7 of them in 2022. 2 of them were struck and killed, and this happened in Pennsylvania. And I don't know if you remember that case at all or not, but 2 troopers were killed along with the pedestrian struck by an impaired driver who apparently had just updated her Twitter saying she was one of the best drunk drivers she knew, words to that effect. And I think I've mentioned that before. That's just a hellacious case, and that's one that I'll not forget. And then of course, another one was when an officer responding as backup struck another officer. 2 were struck while trying to assist a pedestrian. Looks like I've got that in there twice. I apologize. And then 1 was struck with a tire deflation device. You're going to hear more about TDDs, tire deflation devices from us. I think you may hear more about it in the future. And as we look at the first quarter of 2022, 7 of the drivers involved in collisions who were struck by impaired individuals. 2 were struck by distracted individuals. I believe in 2023, we know that one of the cases where a Kansas City officer was struck by a speeding teenager who was also distracted. He ran a red light, killing both the officer and his canine partner, and I believe a civilian who was walking on the sidewalk. So, you know, the results of inattention and speed, as Rio was mentioning, are pretty severe when you have just innocent people being killed by your recklessness. 5 of the officers involved in an auto crash, this is again 2022, did not have their seatbelts fastened. 2 were involved in single vehicle crashes. I mentioned there has, I think, now been 1 in 2023, but this single vehicle crash is different. And that's originally why I reported it as none, because it's an impalement injury. And we'll have to look at that. It's an injury where an officer was driving his cruiser and a fence, the swing gate of a fence was open and he could not see the gate as it was pointed right at him. So he couldn't see that it was actually open. And as he went, he struck the gate and it went through his cruiser and pinned him in the cruiser. So I'm for now calling that a crash, but I'm not sure if that's going to qualify as a single vehicle crash, because sometimes we look at those and that might be a crush injury. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And then in 2022, 5 fatalities involved violations of the slow down and move over law. In 2023, I know of 1 case that is a violation of the slow down and move over law. Region 6 and 4. So because we have a cooperative agreement with NHTSA, we always look at the regions to see what's happening. And regions 4 and 6 are always our hot regions. And so far this year, region 6 is, even though we only have 7 cases, region 6, the state of Oklahoma has 2. And region 6 is our leading region right now in terms of law enforcement traffic related fatalities. Rio mentioned collecting data, and I mentioned this before, but I'm going to mention it all the time so people don't forget it. This is a snapshot of the respondersafety.com struck by page where you can report a struck by crash. This is put together with NHTSA, Federal Highway, and the Emergency Responder Safety Institute with a number of other experts helping design this quick reporting form so anyone can go in and report a struck by that's either property damage, injury, a near miss, or a fatality. Now, as I've said before, we generally get the fatality information, but there are lots of cases where a fire truck has been struck, or a police cruiser was sideswiped, where someone was slightly injured or someone was injured and they just don't get put into this portal. So this is a national reporting database. We cannot solve this problem without more data. And this is why it's so critical that people are aware of this. And if you are aware of a struck by crash in your area, you're an LEL, it doesn't have to involve law enforcement. It can be towing and recovery, can be construction, can be a fire service. Please take the time and enter it into this system. They say it takes about 10 minutes. So first responder, towing and recovery struck by data. So this is a larger picture and 11 cases nationally. Those case numbers went up dramatically in March. Prior to that, there were only, the last time I checked with the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, there were only 2 cases nationally. And this is everything. This is fire, EMS, towing and recovery. So at this point in 2022, we were more than double that number of cases. So again, it's a little encouraging that the numbers, not just for law enforcement, but for all first responders in towing and recovery, are going down. One thing I would mention is, and I don't know if you all heard of it or not, there was a horrific crash in the state of Maryland. In fact, it was in the same county where this traffic safety summit is being held. A vehicle was changing lanes and I guess sideswiped another vehicle as they vied for the same lane, and that drove one vehicle over along the Jersey wall, and it entered an open area in a construction zone at speed, flipped over and killed 6 construction workers. To me, that's the worst construction crash like that I've ever heard of, with 6 people being killed. So they're certainly going to be talking about that in this upcoming summit. And it's something that everyone should be looking at in terms of safety on the roadway. And we know that at construction sites, you've heard me talk before about officers who are staffing those sites with their cruisers, as many states require. They need a marked police car at the beginning of the taper and sometimes at the end with their lights on. Very often these are on midnights, late at night. And we have a number of cases where officers have also been struck and killed while either sitting in their car or working those construction sites to divert traffic. So it's something else to focus on. This is a document that I just learned about, and I'm trying to remember who shared it with me. And if you haven't seen it, I will be happy to send you an electronic copy of it. It is the cost of crashes. And this is based on analysis done by NHTSA for the year 2019. So if you're looking up there and can see that date, this is just all based on 1 year of full analysis. And it takes a look at what each one of the segments involved in a crash costs and what the costs of these crashes are in terms of injuries, fatalities, damage to vehicle. And there's a lot of important takeaways from this, apart from just the economic impact. You see down the bottom left there, 14.2 million motor vehicle crashes at a cost of $340 billion. And then when you add in the quality of life valuations that are considered, the total is $1.37 trillion. So our efforts to reduce crashes are going to help this as well. And again, I'll give you my email at the end of this. And if you shoot me an email, I'll be happy to send this. There's a lot more on this document. I cut and pasted it and made it a little larger for this presentation, so you would get an idea of the data that's on this document. And it's the first one of these that I've ever seen. So I think it's got a lot of good information and is useful for anyone, whether you're law enforcement and LEL. This is information you can take out to the public to show the costs of crashes beyond just the injuries and the fatalities. So in July, we hosted the National Law Enforcement Traffic Safety Summit. That was here. By the way, as always, I'm in the museum today. I'm in the Hoover room of the museum. Normally, I like to try and put a kind of cool background for you guys to see, but the background I had was too bright and you wouldn't be able to see my pretty face. So I had to turn around. But we hosted this traffic safety summit, and I'm very proud of that summit. And one of the reasons I'm proud of it is because it has led to another summit where this next summit, which I've already mentioned, is tackling a whole host of issues, not just law enforcement. But this summit is being hosted by the Eastern Transportation Coalition. It is going to be virtually broadcast, as well as you can attend in person. The image on the screen there is the Maritime Training Center's auditorium. You can see it's quite large, but I believe in-person seating is going fast. The dates are May 8th through the 10th. And let me tell you just quickly how that's going to work. It's a half day on the 8th, starting at noon, a full day on the 9th, and then a half day in the morning on the 10th. And that's so our speakers and people can come and go, catch flights, and we're not just cramming 2 days into where people are having difficulty arriving and leaving and having to book an extra day to stay or leave or to come and go. So it's a half day on the 8th, a full day on the 9th, and then a half day in the morning of the 10th, and then everyone's going to get out of there. If you look at that HTTPS there, that URL, simply in your browser or your Google or Yahoo, whatever it is you do, just type in tetcoalition.org. And down in the bottom right of the Eastern Transportation Coalition will be an events calendar that has the Move Over Distracted Driving Conference. And again, it's going to stream. And so if you send me an email and are concerned about not being able to register for the stream, I'll make sure I can send you a link to the YouTube channel that'll be streaming this live. And this is where it's going to be. I mentioned the Maritime Training Center in Linthicum, Maryland, which is outside of Baltimore. But I want you to also know what it's going to cover. So they're going to be survivors, law enforcement survivors, talking about the loss of their family member, fire service, EMS, towing and recovery, and general citizens who are talking about their experience losing their loved one, predominantly to a struck-by crash, but not always. There's going to be members of the National Volunteer Fire Council there. NHTSA, of course, is going to be there. Federal Highway, representatives of the Fire Service and the FFF, the Fallen Firefighters Foundation, representatives from towing and recovery, representatives from the construction industry. Of course, law enforcement will be there, as well as we've asked for a TSRP, Traffic Resource Prosecutor, to come and talk to us so that they can help share some of the information that they have and the things that they would like all of us as law enforcement, towing and recovery, or fire to look at and evaluate in terms of evidence when we know we're dealing with a fatal crash that may in fact be the result of criminal negligence and may involve a criminal prosecution. So that prosecutor is going to take us through that. There's going to be a case study from a lieutenant in the Pennsylvania State Police. There are some folks who are looking at head protection. I think this is a growing trend as well. I know some occupational safety folks have been looking at the use of headgear along the roadway. And you may see some new recommendations coming out or new guidelines coming out, not just for fire employees. They already have to wear their helmets on the roadway, but for others. And of course, construction always has their helmets on, but there could be a recommendation that while we're out there, we don some form of protective headgear. And then, as I mentioned, slow down and move over laws are going to be one of the major focuses of this. The laws are different in every state. You could unknowingly be violating a state law because as you drive, say, from Washington up to New England, you pass through 6 different states, and you may not slow down to the recommended speed in one state, or you may not have followed the direction if it was a vehicle that didn't have its emergency lights on. You know, the laws vary on some of these things, and I think there's an effort to try and create some legislation that's more uniform. And then there's going to be a showcase for technology. And that'll be everything from these systems that geofence around a crash scene to alert drivers of an impending crash and telling them to get over and to slow down, as well as the technology that, if you looked at that picture of our booth, where we always share the lighting options to make your scene brighter, to better direct drivers, to alert them to your presence, to not only make you more visible, but to help manage and divert traffic with some of those electronic options. So there are going to be a number of vendors there as well, sharing their new technology, very similar to what we did for our July 28th conference. And as I mentioned, you know, the topics for us in safety haven't really changed. As I said, for 2023, I don't have a lot of actionable data because we've had 7 cases, and one of them I said it was a motorcycle crash. And I believe that crash involved a motorcyclist who was hit by debris as he was driving down the roadway. It happened down in Florida, and I think either a palm frond or something fell off a tree, hit him, and caused him to crash. There has been a struck by, and you see TDDs are one of the boxes here in that slide. And the one struck by we've had is a state trooper who was struck and killed deploying tire deflation devices to end a pursuit. I think this topic merits some closer examination as we look at the use of those devices. And as I pull the data, a number of law enforcement officers have been killed deploying these devices. And again, as I've always said, I'm not saying we shouldn't use them. I just think we might need to do better training or have some better preparedness in how these are deployed so we don't suffer these terrible losses. Seatbelts, of course, even in 2022, when I completed the data, 47% of officers killed in traffic crashes were not wearing their seatbelt. Fatigue, another big issue. It's probably getting worse given the fact that so many police agencies are losing personnel and having difficulty replacing them, and officers are being held over or forced to work extra shifts, etc. Complacency, as always, and if you're familiar with below 100, that's one of the things that they work on. Apart from the 5 tenets, they talk about complacency. Training, always. If we train with our firearms twice a year, we should be doing the same with our vehicles. And I don't know if anyone follows, you know, some of the news feeds like Officer One or LexisNet, or not LexisNet, Lexipol, or any of the other law enforcement websites, but there's a newer video of a state trooper, and I can't remember if it was Iowa. I think it was Iowa. Anyway, he had made a traffic stop and was making a right-hand approach when the vehicle that he had stopped was sideswiped, even though his cruiser was pointed out and he had created a safety lane. The vehicle he stopped was sideswiped by another car. If he had been standing there, we would have been talking about him today. But he made a right side approach, and that saved him. If he had been on the left side, as I said, things could have ended badly. And the last 2 things, again, always we stress the use of body armor by our law enforcement officers. As we gather data, you find a number of officers are still not wearing their body armor. And body armor will protect you in a crash and help prevent a crush injury. And then, as I mentioned, being seen is important, right? Guardian angel lights, whatever it is you need, high visibility reflective gear, that ANSI certified stuff has got to be worn when you're out on the roadway. As always, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If not, we'll close it out. Here are some NHTSA information. We always talk about Below 100, very effective program with very good instructors. We had one of their good instructors with us when we did the July Traffic Safety Summit, and they have very dynamic instructors. And of course, you know, the information they have is really important. And here are the two sites that you can go to. And the other one is for trafficsafetymarketing.gov. And that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rio, that has posters and a lot of things that you can use if you're building your own campaign. So here is the information on me. That's my email. And again, if you're interested in that fact sheet and or just me sending you a link to the Traffic Safety Summit, please email me at nbrule@nleomf.org, and I will, as soon as we have that final link from the person who's streaming that website, excuse me, the Traffic Safety Summit, I'll just forward that on to you. I think that's all I've got. Anna, are we good?
I believe we have one question.
We do? I'm sorry. Okay. Yep.
It's not really a question. I think he is interested in the topic of the officer striking guild.
Okay. Yeah. So we do have some interest in that topic, and it's an important topic. And before we came on, I was discussing it a little bit with Rio, and how to address it and try and improve safety around the use of those devices. And I think what I'll do is go back and do some more research. I know one of the sadder facts in some of those cases is that officers were struck by other officers who were involved in the pursuit while they were trying to also end the pursuit. So there are a lot of, no pun intended, moving parts when you are deploying these tire deflation devices, and hopefully there's some new technological improvements that can create even more distance than the ones that sort of pop those ones out across the road. Maybe there's technology that can improve. Again, I think it's a worthwhile tool, but certainly we got to look at how they're being used or trained on, because there've been way too many deaths. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you all. Thank you for your comments. Rio, again, thank you. I think our next quarter we'll analyze and see where the data is taking us. Hopefully it stays where it is. And we're working on getting a presentation from an agency that has created its own officer traffic safety program, taking into account a whole lot of things to make traffic safety, not traffic enforcement, but safety of the officers paramount in their program. They submitted it to our Destination Zero program here at the Memorial Fund. And hopefully we're going to hear from that agency on how they built their program and what they focused on. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank Rio and NHTSA, as always, for their support, and hope to see you guys probably in July for our next quarter webinar. Thanks again. Cheers.
Thank you.